Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Heroes of Might and Magic 7 or Might and Magic Heroes 7, as they've now taken to calling it for some reason. What was wrong with Heroes of Might and Magic initially? I don't know, but they decided to change it around a little bit. It is needless to say the 7th game in the Heroes of Might and Magic series, which was in itself a spin-off of the Might and Magic RPG series, which you might argue has now become secondary to Heroes. Perhaps. Maybe, maybe not. It's developed by Limbic Entertainment. They were responsible for Might and Magic 10 Legacy, which was in the RPG line, and they also co-developed Might and Magic Heroes 6 alongside Black Hole Entertainment and Virtuous, and they have been put in charge of this one. I have a pretty long history with this series. I started playing back with Heroes of Might and Magic 2 on my Acorn Archimedes, actually. It was a long, long time ago. And I followed the series through all of its iterations, bought pretty much every game, and enjoyed most of them, although, as I think with many long-time fans of the series, I had a few quibbles, let's just say, with some of the design decisions. But Heroes of Might and Magic is perhaps a slave to a very conservative fan base in the sense that they know what they like and they don't like deviation. There are some really crazy stories about Heroes of Might and Magic, including the fact that Heroes 3 was supposed to have a technological faction of some sort, and the developer had to pull that and replace it with something else as a result of, let's just say, feedback that was so unpleasant as to make them do that. It included death threats, if you can believe that. So, pretty disgusting behavior. But one way or the other, it has a core fan base that buys every game and has a very particular idea as to what Heroes of Might and Magic should be, which is of course a problem when you're trying to innovate in any way. What happens with Heroes of Might and Magic 7? Well, you will see. We'll talk quite a lot about that as we go in, but first things first, options menu. So, graphically, the game is not very impressive at all, even at high resolutions. We're running it at 1080p here, because even if I run it higher than that, the chances of frame rate drops are very much present. The game's performance is rather poor, at least in my honest opinion. Not that you necessarily need high frame rate to run a turn-based game like this, but it's very easy to notice. So I've got everything on here, for the most part. I did mess around just a little bit, just to see whether or not there was any way of getting a decent boost in performance. The only way I found was to turn off anti-aliasing. I do not know what kind of anti-aliasing this is. It doesn't tell you. My texture quality is on Ultra. I shudder to think exactly what the textures look like with anything lower than that. But then you've got shader quality, skeletal mesh, all this sort of thing, post-processing. The kind of things you would expect. For some inexplicable reason, audio language is in the video menu. I couldn't tell you why. There are some very strange, unfinished things in this game, and I imagine that was something that just slipped through the net. Outside of that, separate audio sliders, which is always nice. You will not be receiving too much voiceover, regardless, so don't have to worry too much about that. You have a bit of graphical user interface customization here, which is always pleasant. You know, I like that sort of thing. It's good to have it, such as mouse window lock. Too many games don't do that. They don't lock your cursor into the window if you're playing in windowed mode, which is annoying. So you can mess around with that just a little bit. So I'm pretty happy about that, actually. There's some relatively good stuff going on here. We're going to put on the event log just for your personal information. If we head on over to gameplay, you've got speed sliders. You're going to need these because the game has a tendency to drag unless you increase the speed. For the purposes of this video, we're going to keep it on normal speed because otherwise the animations are going to look a bit weird. But as you're playing it, the chances are you want to turn this off because it's pointless, and you want to turn these up because you'll save some time. Some of this stuff here is Collector's Edition, I believe, or unlockable with Uplay stuff. So, bobblehead mode and llama mounts, you can unlock these through Uplay, and yes, this game does require you to run Uplay. Moving on to gameplay, that was gameplay. Key bindings. I mean, really, you don't need key bindings in this game at all, but there are a couple of nice little things that you may decide to learn if you so desire. You don't need any of this. I use the mouse for everything in this game. There's no need to rush, but perhaps if you decide to play multiplayer with timers on, you might want to use these. Okay, so what has the game got in terms of modes? Well, we have a set of campaigns over here. They are quite short, relatively speaking, in the sense that they've got about 3 to 4 missions each. Some of them have 2, as you can see. And They will, however, take per mission quite a few hours. It is a turn-based game, and the way that these campaigns are designed is that they require certain objectives which require quite a lot of work, like bypass this area. It's like, oh, I've got to build up an army large enough to do that. That's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks of game time. Obviously not playtime, but each mission's going to take you a number of hours. Now, I'm one of the sort of people that never plays the campaigns in Heroes games. I don't find them interesting. I've never found the law of the land interesting whatsoever. I have, for the most part, ignored them. And I played a little bit of the campaign here, and I am not convinced to change my opinion. I have to be honest with you. There is even less going on here than there was in the predecessor, Heroes of Might and Magic 6, which had some interesting ideas with persistent heirloom weaponry and account leveling, which was all tied into an online system through Uplay, which a lot of people hated, but it was a nice piece of innovation. That is now gone, needless to say, so you just have a straightforward set of campaigns. Nothing particularly special here. The storyline is relatively threadbare, to say the least. The voice acting and the script is not exactly special, and even if you click on these campaigns, when it starts to talk to you about what's going on, it doesn't actually bother to animate anything. Like, if I click start here, it will... I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. You get these little cutscenes like, okay, let's have them speak to each other. They are quite literally just static models. No lip syncing, no attempt at anything here. As you can see, this is a symptom of something that this game suffers from, and that seems to be a threadbare budget to try and accomplish what they were setting out to do. It really genuinely seems like this game didn't have enough money to get what it wanted done. And obviously we're going to skip through this. We don't really care too much about any of this. We're going to be jumping into a custom game to demonstrate the better features of this title. So yeah, campaigns are not particularly inspired, nothing to write home about as far as I can tell. Not that I've ever really cared about that anyway. So outside of that, you have single-player custom games, which is the meat of the game in my honest opinion, and you also have multiplayer. The multiplayer is fraught with issues at the moment. It is extremely buggy, it has frequent crashes and disconnections. This is a widespread problem reported by many people. I, once again, am not much of a multiplayer guy when it comes to Heroes. And why would you be? This game was never really designed that way. I remember playing Heroes 2 in Hot Seat with my brother a long time ago, and I could see the enjoyment there, certainly, but playing large multiplayer games in this title is laborious, it is tedious, because of the way that the battles work. Battles can drag out, you really have to have auto battles on, which is never a great way of doing things if you actually want to play this in multiplayer, or just play with two people. You're just sitting there doing nothing as you're waiting for everybody else to take their turns. It's hopeless. Like, it's even worse than Civilization, because at least in Civ, the battles are very quick. In this, you go to a battle screen, and you have to go through a turn-based battle which can drag on, so... I mean, I don't really care that this feature doesn't work, because I've never been concerned with it, but I know plenty of people are, so just beware. Outside of that, you've got a duel versus the AI, which allows you to just play a random battle with some random units, which is, I suppose, a nice little throwaway mode, and then you have single-player, which to me is the meat of the game, which is custom. So, this is the map selection. Yeah, it's not particularly impressive, is it? They don't have a lot. I'd like to say, hey, we can just keep scrolling. No, that's it. That's all they have started you off with. There is a very nice map editor that comes with this. I will say that. It is possible if this game gets popular, there'll be a lot of really great maps. I dabbled in the map editor, and I noticed it had the ability to put in scripting and all sorts of things like that, and to mold the terrain in full 3D. It seems like it's possible to create some amazing maps with this game, but that would involve people actually buying it in the first place, and I'm not necessarily sure that they will. So yeah, that's the selection there. Alright, I'm going to load into a single-player custom game, and this is fairly far along. I've unlocked all the creatures for my dungeon faction, and I should be able to show you some of the higher-level stuff, higher-level spells and combat, and then we'll just dive deep into the mechanics of this particular title and talk a little bit about it. There will be some comparison to the previous Heroes games, although I'm going to try and keep that light, because I imagine that a lot of people coming to this video have not played those games, so I will try to explain Heroes from a basic standpoint as well. Plus, honestly, I've never been a hardcore Heroes player. I like the franchise, but there are people that dedicate their lives to this series. I don't want to comment on anything high level as a result there. Alright, welcome to Heroes 7. And you may immediately notice, if you played Heroes 6, that there is a return to lots of different resources up the top there. You may also notice that this game looks very similar to Hero 6. In fact, arguably, it doesn't look as good as Hero 6. The first big complaint I've got about it is that this game is not all that impressive to look at. And in order to demonstrate that, I'm going to dive into a quick fight over here. And then you'll be able to look at things like animations and terrain quality and all that sort of thing. So after a brief loading screen, it will dive into the battle, and we will start in This is the Battle screen. You will probably notice poor ground texture quality, very, very bland texture work across the board, and, of course, gnarly animations. So let's start with the demonstration of that. They really started to cut corners, I have to say, with this game when it came to the animation of the units. There's a lot of reused assets here from Hero 6. And honestly, it's difficult to be impressed by the vast majority of what's going on screen. Even if we zoom right in, we can't zoom in that far. There's just such a lack of detail here, and also a lack of inspiration, really, when it comes to developing some really interesting creature models. It's really quite disappointing, surprisingly so. Even things like some of my more powerful abilities don't look particularly great. I mean, you've got things like the sound desyncing with the animation and all that sort of thing. It's sloppy in general. It really is quite sloppy. Now, this is not necessarily the biggest problem ever, I have to admit. Do I really care how a Heroes game actually looks and animates? Not all that much. Obviously, I'm willing to play a lot of the older ones. Heroes 3 is considered a classic by many people, and they still play it to this day, even though it is well over a decade old at this point. But I think when you're selling a game for full price, which this game is, then there is a reasonable expectation that there will be an advancement over the previous title. And this game does not have that in terms of either aesthetic design or general graphics quality. It is severely lacking in both of those aspects, which is disappointing. Hero 6 had some really creative and maybe over-designed units, I have to say. This game, oh, it's just stuck full of generic in many ways, unfortunately. Animations that lack impact, and more to the point, like, bad sound assets as well. Really poor combat sounds. Very anemic. You'd expect something fantastic. But that mild thud is all we really got from the swing of an axe as large as a dragon. And the game is just chock full of that, unfortunately. Yeah, not all that impressive to look at anywhere, really, outside of one thing, and that is the town screens. So, yeah, don't look at that. That's disgusting. We'll get to this in a second. This looks alright. This is quite nice. Unfortunately, it does point out something quite specific. And that is that this game lacks a unified aesthetic across the board. You might have noticed when we went to the loading screens and at the start of the video, there's a lot of stained glass around the place. And I got the idea that that was going to be the aesthetic they were looking for. And in the case of the town screens, yeah, they kind of did. I mean, this looks pretty good. And obviously, when you build a building, it will pop up there. There is a lack of detail here, certainly. You know, compared to the fully 3D rendered towns in Heroes of Might and Magic 5, this isn't really close. But it looks alright. Hard to complain. We move over here at the dungeon. You know, this is alright. This looks pretty nice. It's just a shame that nothing else in the game looks like this. And even in the town screens, this aesthetic is not shared. Let me show you something hideous. Welcome to the Thieves Guild UI. What is this? This is hideous. Compared to the town screen, this looks like it was just slapped in at the last minute. This user interface looks like it was part of an early access game. Really, really disappointing. And if we go to, say, build structures as well, you have an overly complex sort of tech tree going on here that isn't really all that well put together and is not clear as to what everything actually is. These tiny little pictures here and there can be rather difficult to figure out, so you're going to be hovering over the vast majority of it. Not to mention, of course, that the green stuff, the green saturation is so intense that you can barely see what's going on behind it. So visual identification is something that you just really can't do here. So you're going to have to be filtering your way through and looking at the tooltips by right-clicking and all that sort of thing. It would be nice if you could just hover over for a tooltip, but you can't do that. Not to mention that the screen doesn't give you all the information that you could possibly want. For instance, the Soulless Forge. Let's say I wanted to get the upgrade to the Soulless, or upgrade to the Soulless, and I wanted to know, okay, what are their stats? Well, you know, what would be nice is if I right-clicked on this and it would say, yeah, this lets you recruit a Soulless, and this is what it does, and all that sort of thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that. So in order to get that information, I have to click this, and that takes me to a completely different screen, which is the Heropedia, which is not particularly well put together, unfortunately. As to why you'd have to hover over each and every ability, I don't know, but you do. There's a ton of wasted space here that could have very easily been used just to list these abilities so you didn't have to hover over each and every one of them. And these guys have like 3 to 4 passive abilities each, so there's a lot to remember here. And it would be nice if that was clearly displayed all in one place. So that's not too great. Not to mention the fact that it doesn't cross-link very well. So there are certain abilities that you'd like to maybe click on in the description to go and see, hey, does anyone else have this ability? Or what does this ability actually do? And that's something that doesn't really happen either. What's worse still is that you have to go to the Heropedia to get that information, even if I've got the creatures here, like, say, the Minotaur Guard, for instance. If I hold right mouse button, you think, oh, okay, all the information's there. You don't have to go to the Heropedia. Let's hover over the O. O, O, O. What are you doing? Why? Why exactly can't I hover over this tooltip to get information about all this stuff? Why do I have to go to a separate bloody screen to get that information? It's not very well designed at all. This game is awful at communicating information to you. It's hopeless at it. So yeah, not particularly impressed with that, I have to say. And outside of that, it's probably what you would expect, I think, out of a Heroes of Might and Magic game. You head over here to recruit your heroes. It'll give you information. Thankfully, you can hover over all of that stuff. Although, if you want to see abilities, you can't do it that way. So that's pretty damn annoying. This is the trading screen, which is exactly what you'd expect. The interesting thing is here, they've got a bit of the stained glass aesthetic in this area right here. Yeah? And if you notice down to the bottom here, the turn timer also has a little bit of that. So it's like they decided what their aesthetic would be. They started to implement it, and then they ran out of time. Because this screen, this looks good, you know? Got a little bit of stained glass there, nice representations of the different resources, and then you click on Thieves Guild, and you get that. Oh, it's bloody hideous. You got a town defense, and it's reasonably well put together, but again, this doesn't really fit the aesthetic at all. The Magic Guild looks pretty gnarly as well. It's just... it lacks polish. It really does lack polish on all of these screens here, which I find to be very, very disappointing. So yeah, that's me complaining about the aesthetic for the most part. It doesn't look great. I think Heroes 6 genuinely looked better. And of course, the previous Heroes games that weren't necessarily rendered in 3D, although Heroes 5 was, of course, also had their own unique charm to them. This is bland, it's charmless, it doesn't have a unifying visual aesthetic to it. It's just a mess, in my honest opinion. Alright, we've talked about graphics, we've talked about how it looks. Let's talk a little bit about gameplay. We'll start with combat. Now, I imagine what you would like to know is whether or not there is any real difference between the combat in this game and the previous titles. But before that, I should explain for those who've never played this series exactly what this involves. So you may have noticed that I had a town there. The town is what you upgrade in order to construct buildings which support various creature types. So this army is as a result of my town, so I've teched up to things like black dragons and all that sort of thing. That's the highest tech available, and as a result I can recruit those powerful creatures. Now my hero, which is this fellow over here, who passively participates in the combat with little attacks and magic and also stats boosts, is the reason why I can control this army in the first place. So I have a selection of creatures under this guy's command, and you can go out into the world, you can explore, you can find different bonuses and buildings on the map to collect resources from, and of course you can fight creatures. And the way that you do that is by running into these neutral creature packs and you get a fight. And this is a good way to clear out areas in order to get loot. In this case, the creatures are Yes, what are they? Blade Masters, and they're in stacks of 25. So there's 75 of these creatures in total. So you kill units as part of a stack, and you attack as part of a stack as well. It's the way that they streamline things. So in this case, I'm firing here. This guy's being incapacitated, so he shouldn't be able to act next turn. And I can choose to end my turn there. I get to fire again, which is always lovely. And another critical hit. So double incapacitation. Can't really complain about that. And of course, I have a nasty beastie little black dragon over here, which I can send over in this direction. And he has a breath attack and all sorts of debuffs and all manner of lovely things like that. Now, if we want to cast a spell, I showed you one previously. Let's try and show you something. This one should look good. I mean, Implosion was one of the best looking spells in previous games. I don't believe I've ever cast this before. Let's give it a try. Let's see what it looks like. So this is what Implosion looks like. That was it. Yeah. Very powerful spell. Does it look it? Absolutely not. No way, I'm afraid. Very, very disappointing look to it. But never mind. So you can use spells every turn, and you utilize your stacks of creatures in order to horribly murder the opposition, as you can see. It's really as simple as that, honestly. It's a fairly simple turn-based combat system. However, there are a couple of changes that you might need to know about. So this entry to the series introduces flanking. So with flanking, if you hit from the flank or from behind, you get bonus damage. So it'll give you a damage modifier here. I don't believe it's possible to actually flank these guys yet because they have vigilance, but on any other creature, if I attacked from here, I'd get a modifier. If I attacked from behind, I get an even better one. And there are some creatures which specialize in flanking, such as creatures with backstab and all that sort of thing. So it does throw in an additional tactical element that wasn't necessarily there previously, which is nice to have, I will admit. Although it does result in some pretty silly situations where creatures will constantly keep running around the back of the other to hit each other, which is kind of silly. It's if you've got like one stack and the enemy has one stack, you're going to be seeing that song and dance time and time and time again. But that's not really a big deal. That's mostly just a visual concern. I think the actual mechanic is really quite good, and it makes you think a little bit more about your positioning and all that sort of thing. So I do dig that. Outside of that, there aren't really all that many major changes to combat outside of the fact that you now have unique warfare units for each faction. Now, if you played the previous games, you would be aware that, of course, you could recruit things like Ballista and a medical tent and all that sort of thing. Now, this game does a similar thing, but each faction now has particular warfare units that are themed to their faction. So in this case, I've got a Faceless over here, which is our version of the medical tent. It puts a death cloak on one of my units, which means that every time when they get hit, they will do damage to the attacker, and you can upgrade it. So it's the dungeon spin on a medical tent. And I like that. You know, the factions do have a decent amount of unique feel to them, I have to say. Good selection of units, nice customization when it comes to the towns and all that sort of thing. So they didn't really drop the ball there, which I'm really quite pleased about. That would be a very easy thing to mess up. So if I go back to my town, I'll demonstrate what I'm talking about. We'll talk a little bit about the way the towns work as well. They're very, very similar to previous games. You build one structure a day, although it's actually possible to get a skill which will allow you to build 2 structures a day, which is really powerful. There is a new feature, which is the governor slot. Now, the game doesn't tell you about this at all. It mentions that there are governor abilities in the skill trees of certain heroes, but it doesn't tell you how to assign a governor. I only discovered this by looking at game facts, if you can believe that. This game basically has no tutorial, so it doesn't explain at all how governing works, what this is. I discovered you had to drag it up into the corner. I didn't even know that was anything. And the Heropedia is completely lacking in any mechanical information for the game whatsoever. So, if you want to do a little in-game encyclopedia, take a look at how Civ does it, because the way that this game does it is missing the point. Now, you can drag a governor onto each town, and if your hero has governor abilities, those abilities will actually affect things. The UI isn't even finished here, as you can see. It's like, hey, I've got that! And they've got text overlapping other text. It's just, yeah, messy. One way or the other, the heroes can level up abilities which will allow them to buff particular things, so that's kind of neat. I could build 2 things a day here if I had the money for it. Outside of that, though, everything is held as so far so standard. They've got the town level system from Hero 6, which means that you have to build a certain number of buildings per tier in order to access the next one. This prevents you from doing some like silly rush strategies and all that sort of thing, and it limits your economic growth because you can't rush right down to a capital, which will give you extra gold per day. So your progression is kind of linear, I suppose. One complaint that I do have is actually related to the fact that they've gone back to 6 resources again. Now, some people complained in Hero 6 that they had dumbed the game down by reducing the number of resources to 4. I personally was okay with that, and that means that you'll have to collect 6 resources plus gold, and quite a few of these buildings require specific resources. So, with the Soulless Forge in particular, I had problems getting the Shadow Steel I needed because there was not a single Shadow Steel mine anywhere around here. Thankfully, you can build a Shadow Steel refinery in your base, which will allow you to manufacture that, but it does mean that before you do that, you might be quite limited in the creatures that you can choose. So that's maybe a disadvantage of having so many resources. Outside of that, though, I mean, everything's kind of so far so standard, really. They've gone back to the good old random magic nonsense, although you can specialize the Mage Guilds. As soon as you build one, it has a preferred school of magic, so it'll provide at least 1 dark spell on each Mage Guild level, except when it doesn't. This is a lie. Oh dear, it is an annoying lie. It says here that it will provide at least 1 dark spell on each magic guild level. That is guild 4, and that is not a dark spell, because you only get 1 tier 4 spell, so unfortunately that is a little bit of a lie. And they also limit the spells you can get based on what hero class you are, so if you pick like the dungeon faction, I can never gain light spells from my mage guilds. I've got to find them elsewhere. Outside of that, of course, it's all sort of randomized, which I find to be a little bit annoying because it's very easy to get the exact same spell that you picked up from a shrine. Now, for instance, there's a shrine down here, if I recall correctly, that gave me like 3 or 4 different spells. It's maybe anyway, you know, that's a magic shrine, you get the idea. But whatever the case, I ended up getting all the same spells in my Mage Guild upgrade, which meant that my Mage Guild upgrade was a waste. So I was pretty annoyed by that, honestly. I do like the fact that you can at least lean the guild in a particular direction and get at least 1 spell from your preferred school every level, but still, I think that the random system is kind of pointless and a little bit ridiculous. I think that's really about it in terms of town building, outside of the fact that you now have a town defense screen. So, fortifications will now spawn garrison units, as you can see here, that solely exist to defend your castle. So, in this case, I've got fortifications level 2. It spawns up to 5 Medusa and 5 Minotaurs. I also have towers, which I've upgraded. You can get a moat, and you can also upgrade your walls and gate to get more HP. Now, each of the factions' castles also has some specific features. So in this case, this is the Dark Watch, so I get 2 towers in siege combat, all that sort of thing. And you can get a few little buildings that will help you out, which I think is kind of cool. Like, for instance, there. These have been in previous games, of course, but they've fleshed them out quite nicely. They've also fleshed out the spying system, so you can do things like sabotage, and you can spy on the enemy and plunder resources and all that sort of thing. And needless to say, there is a ultimate building available if you happen to collect a certain artifact. Yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of the town. Nothing really out of the ordinary here. It's well fleshed out, as far as I'm concerned. I don't have too many objections outside of dodgy UI that I've talked about earlier. Okay, so we've covered combat, we have covered towns. Let's cover hero development briefly. So if we head into skills here, you'll notice that there's a skill wheel. And of course, that's going to vary depending on what your faction is and what kind of hero you've chosen. So in this case, I have economy skills. These are governor skills. If I hover over here, you can see if I'm the governor of a town, it's going to increase the production of sawmills and ore pits in the town's area of control. I can decrease the cost of buildings and all that sort of thing. And you also have ultimate abilities. If you have got, I believe it's the 2 master level abilities that sort of feed into this, you can pick a mastery in the center here, which will give you a nice little bonus. This all works pretty well, honestly. Every tier gives you a bonus, and then you can pick what you want from inside that tier based on what's useful. And they are themed. So in this case, the Shroud of Malassa is a dungeon-specific thing, which is all based around buffing up the Shroud ability and all sorts of things like that. The only problem I've got with this is that It often refers to abilities that I don't necessarily even understand because I've never encountered them. So let me give you an example of this. Here you go. Dark Knowledge 3. So Agony, yeah, that makes perfect sense. The first attack on a shadow image will miss and not destroy it. What's a shadow image? I don't know. Can I click this to go to the Heropedia? No. I have no idea what that is. As I said, the game does a terrible job of explaining concepts to you. Outside of that, though, I really like the skill progression system, honestly, and I don't really mind that they reverted the alignment stuff they were doing in Hero 6, because that didn't really make a great deal of sense anyway, and it was a little bit clunky and, frankly, contrived. So this is all pretty good. Outside of that, you've got your army and your inventory and all sorts of things like that. You should be intimately familiar with this if you've ever played any of the other games. If you haven't, you can equip your hero with various items. Simple as that. And the hero screen will show you all of your stats, and these do buff up the creatures that you have in your army, so a more powerful hero will be more effective with the same unit that a weaker hero has. Alright, so that's that covered. Do I have any more complaints? I kind of do. For one thing, the turn time. The bloody turn time. It takes far too long to get through the turns of the enemy. Let me demonstrate that. This has improved a little bit since the beta, but it's still slow. Unnecessarily slow. If you play an 8-player game, you can be sitting in this turn time for over a minute. And bear in mind, of course, I have a very fast PC, so if you're running on a lower spec machine, I hope you're willing to wait. It takes a long time, unnecessarily so. Now it's finally through. Oh, no, it's not. We're still going. Okay. Are you quite finished? Thank you. Much appreciated. You took your bloody time, didn't you? Oh my, oh my. I'm gonna do... yeah. I shall go for water there. Yeah, that can drag on, especially in the larger games. So that's really annoying, because needless to say, you're going to be sitting there twiddling your thumbs between turns, which is never what you want. Now here's the big issue, at least in my honest opinion, with Hero 7. It's got a lot of small problems that I've mentioned. It's apparently got a lot of bugs. Apparently it crashes quite a bit. It's never crashed for me, thankfully, but seemingly that is a big deal to a lot of people, and it is happening quite often, according to the Steam forums and the official forums for this game. Here's the big problem I've got with this. This is a full-priced game, and it doesn't really have a great deal to offer. Does it have an improved aesthetic? Does it look like a great leap in technology? No. Does it have a great leap in terms of mechanics and innovation? No. Does it have a great leap in terms of storytelling and the campaigns? No. It doesn't. Does it have brand new factions? No. Indeed, it is missing one of the fan favorites, that being the Inferno, which was one of my personal favorites. So, it has 6 factions, thank God, at least it launched with 6, but you're seeing the same stuff that you have seen over and over again for game after game after game after game. And that, as far as I'm concerned, for a full-priced release is not necessarily acceptable. Remember when I earlier said that the game is perhaps a slave to its conservative fanbase? Maybe it's got a lot to do with that. Maybe it really is down to the fact that people that play this series have a very particular idea of what they want, and they will not accept differentiation from that notion. Maybe that's why. It could be. It could very well be. But when I play this game, I come back to the same question time and time and time again. And that is, why aren't I playing Heroes 5? Heroes 5 is, of course, my personal favorite. Not everyone's going to disagree with me on that, but that game had plenty of interesting ideas and innovation when it came to the way that it did its hero progression, the way that it did its upgrades in Tribes of the East, where you had 2 mutually exclusive upgrades for each creature. That gave you a ton of variety. There was a lot of interesting stuff going on there. And when I go to Hero 7, I'm like, where's the new stuff? What have you changed? I mean, they freely admitted that they weren't going to innovate with this title. Like, they almost wore as a badge of honor, really. And it's just such a... It's a safe sequel. It's a really safe sequel. And I'm going to be honest, if that's all it was and it was well done, I wouldn't have as many problems. But it's not well done. It's a step backwards in terms of presentation. It's a step backwards in terms of UI. It's a step backwards in terms of functionality. it doesn't look good. It looks old. It doesn't look like a 2015 release. It looks like a 2010 release. It looks unfinished. It feels unfinished. There are various screens that clearly did not have enough time put into them. If you want to sell me the same game over and over and over again, you better damn well make sure that your game is polished. And this isn't. It's slow, it's buggy, it's frankly ugly in many situations. And I just don't think it's worth full price. It's very hard for me to justify it. And let me put it this way. If they tried to keep this conservative for fans of the franchise, who are very particular and very picky about what they're okay with, by the way, then perhaps to some degree they succeeded, but in doing so, they completely and totally forgot new gamers for the franchise. You remember how I mentioned earlier it has no tutorial? This game is impenetrable to someone that's never played this series before. It is chock full of abilities, it is chock full of statistics that you need to learn, it is chock full of very complex hero interactions and creature interactions and all sorts of things like that, conditional buffs and debuffs, and an incredibly complicated UI. I mean, when you dive into this, how the hell do you even know what to do if you've never played this game before? Because I've played Heroes before, I was okay with this. I didn't really have too much of a problem. But the issue, I think, is quite clear when you think about new players. Without a tutorial, and without a game manual, and without a decent in-game encyclopedia and tooltips, this game is very, very difficult to handle. So yes, I suppose they have made a game for fans of the franchise, but have they actually succeeded in doing that, or even making a game that can stand on its own without that franchise loyalty? That's maybe the biggest problem I've got with it. Would I be playing this game if I was not already into this series in a big way and hadn't bought every other game in the franchise? No, I wouldn't. I'd be picking this game to pieces, and I'd be comparing it to Age of Wonders and saying just how much better Age of Wonders does a lot of stuff. That's what I would be doing. That's what I imagine anyone that tries to buy in at this point would be doing as well. I think it fails on both counts. It fails to be a game to appeal to the hardcore fanbase, and it fails to be a game that could ever accept new players. I mean, a lack of tutorial in a game in 2015 is never acceptable, especially not a game with this level of complexity. It's fine for me, it's fine for those of us that have played previous titles. It is not in any way okay to those who maybe haven't played in a while, who are looking to get back into the series, who have forgotten, who didn't play the previous one. The prerequisites to being able to play this right out of the box are very, very high. It's disappointing. Is it enjoyable? Sure, because it's a Heroes game. I enjoy all the Heroes games. I'm going to probably continue to enjoy all the Heroes games until they stop making them, which may very well be after this one, who knows. Because I just enjoy the core gameplay loop. I always have, and I imagine I always will. But here's the thing, I could easily go back to one of the older ones, and I'd have just as much, if not more fun, because it's more fleshed out. It's better optimized. You know, I don't have frame rate drops. Why is my frame rate dropping below 60 here? I don't know. I have a monster PC, but apparently this game doesn't think I do. The game is poorly optimized. I could play ones with better UI. I could play games that run faster. I could play games with more innovation in this series. This series is in a really awkward spot. And I think this game is testament to that. They don't know where they're going with it. Because they know for a fact that the fanbase wants particular things, but how can you grow the franchise and make it viable if you don't make some compromises here and there? And what we have here is a game where they claim to have listened to the fans, and yet the final product is just unfinished and sloppy, as far as I'm concerned. Man, I think like a full back to the drawing board is required when it comes to Heroes of Might and Magic. And I'd be okay with that, because even if they completely changed everything about the game, I still have all the previous games that have like almost infinite replayability. So I don't really care if the next Heroes game barely plays like a Heroes game. If they want to innovate, I'd actually encourage them to do that. Unfortunately, the way they've innovated in the past has not necessarily been the right way to go about things. Perhaps that's the issue there. Perhaps they're just gun-shy now. Yeah, I don't think Hero 7 has a reason to exist. Honestly. It is a sequel for the sake of a sequel. It's not an improvement on previous games. In fact, is a step back in many ways. Which, of course, is a huge disappointment. What a shame. Maybe it'll get better with patching. Maybe it'll get better with DLC and expansions. And, of course, maybe it will get better when it doesn't cost full price. That's probably the best way that I would describe it. Maybe it will suck less when it costs less. God. The music in the background is the same as Hero 6. They even reused that. Damn. Ugh. Oh, well. I don't know what I expected, really. Better than this, certainly. We didn't get it. Might Magic Hero 7, ladies and gentlemen, available for $50 or your regional equivalent on Steam and the Ubisoft Store. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.